So you should have a button that says you want to continue. So welcome. Today is July 16th, 2021. And if you are reading the newspaper, I know there's a lot of different things going on, but there's a lot of conversations about memory and medications. So I thought this was a little um, levity and bit of humor thrown in here in terms of how's our memory. What is memory? Let's start there. So, memory is how we recall information. The brain stores data and retrieves information when it's needed. And over time, it influences our behavior. Excuse me, real quick. Oh, good, you caught yourself on mute. And if we couldn't remember the past, it'd be very hard to have language, relationships, our own identity. And memory loss is defined as forgetfulness or amnesia. There's our goals for today. We'll just kind of go over the multitude of different types of memory that we have, a little bit about pathophysiology and kind of how does our brain work, but not into too much detail. It's like a whole body of science. Some of the disorders with memory and some of the influencing factors associated with memory. I also will provide just a brief COVID update because it's something that has been back on my activity burner. And then also just an FYI for this slide, I like for all of you to put into your red kits and N95. I have some in the office, so happy to give you guys one to slip in there because I know people are traveling and I'd like everyone to be safe as they're getting out and about. And then also, one thing that I neglected to put in that I realized would be very useful in the red kits, but they have them at any of the grocery stores as well as any of the drugstores, is crazy glue or super glue. And the reason I suggest adding that into our little travel kits is many times a filling or a crown can fall out. And the dentist told me once you can just put crazy glue in it and dry it off with your blow dryer and put it back on to protect your tooth. And then they can help fix it when you get back from your trip. So, and then also many people just lifting suitcases and rushing around break their nails, sometimes at an uncomfortable spot. Midway through, and the crazy glue can help alleviate that pain. And so I thought, as well as for minor wounds. So it's a multi-purpose thing. So if you'll throw that into your red kits. I didn't have any at the time when I was building those. If we look at our working memory, we have sensory memory, we have short-term memory and long-term memory. So how does this human brain work? And basically, in a very simplistic manner, we have this brain with a brain stem and something called the cerebellum. This is the frontal lobe. It's split up by activity: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. And then all of these lobes send signals and form nerves that then form the spinal cord, which then makes us move. The frontal lobe is most commonly considered to be our motor lobe. And excuse me real quick. I'm just going to stop share. To make sure everybody is muted. I apologize. And The temporal lobe we think of as time and most active with our memory. However, and the occipital is our visual lobe. Cerebellum is considered to be mainly involved for our balance, and the parietal lobe is considered kind of the gateways for all of this. And however, we are learning as we evaluate with PET scans and study memory and language and post stroke, that all parts of our brain actually are always working together. And it's not quite as simplistic as outlined by these colors. What is the brain made of? The brain only weighs about 3 pounds. It's pretty light in our head, because otherwise, if it was really, really heavy, we would then be um, leaning forward and have a lot of neck pain. It is composed 60% fat, and then the rest, 40%, is mostly water, some protein, and carbohydrates. If we look at the brain in a section, we have this gray matter, usually around on the outsides, and then it's predominantly white matter. And all of these cells will then coalesce to then form these neurons, and then it will come down our spinal cord. But we're not, our brain is not composed of just all these wires that are linear. It's just mostly cellular matter that then come together to form nerves further down in the spinal cord. So it is a semi-gelatinous like structure that is very susceptible to temperature changes, to diet, to hydration, to trauma. And so that's very important to keep in mind as we go forward in terms of our conversation. So let's talk about just the types of memory. So there's sensory memory, and you know, we don't really think about this in these details, but all our senses are very, very important for memory. One of the most transient memory is the sensory memory. We hear, we see, we taste, we smell, and then it goes away. It's just like less than a second. Um, and some of it may be stored, but not a lot of it. So if we stored every single taste that we have and then try to remember that taste back on our tongue, that would be just sensory overload, correct? Same with every sound we've heard. If we keep playing it back in our head, that would also be a sensory overload. So that's why it is just a very short memory, and then it's extinguished. But we can remember how we felt when we ate something, or when we heard music, or when we visualized something. And that goes into a different part of our memory banks, which is some can be short term and some can be long term. Our short term is known as kind of our active memory, and it is available for a short period of time. And it's sometimes can be mere seconds or minutes. And we can only in this short-term memory hold maybe 7 items at once. And then we can, if we hold it along and repeat it enough, then we can move it into long-term memory. And then that would be a rehearsal of the short-term events. Long-term memory is what we primarily want to try to engage in and build up. And there's many different types of sections for long-term memory. We can go semantic, where we just learn rote memory, facts, skills, textbook learning, not necessarily tied to a time or a place. So We may not necessarily remember when we learned something in the textbook, but you know that you learned it. So such as, you know that New York is a city in the United States. Where you picked it up, you may not remember that fact. And then there's this episodic or autobiographical form of memory. You record your experiences, events, time, and it's related. You remember details of you might remember details of your first day of school, but those are episodic. Many of that is also can be brought back by triggering. And then there's the how-to part of our long-term memory. How do we do things? And some can be rote. How do you answer a phone, ride a bike, playing guitar? And those are some things that are very well committed to long-term memory. Um, but we do know that we start seeing some memory deficits with certain diseases. So genetics, many people are right now talking about Alzheimer's, and there is only a 0.5% of Alzheimer's has a, a genetic predisposition. And we can, in early Alzheimer's, there is a blood test for ApoE that we can do to help us predict if that person has that form of genetics for Alzheimer's. There, just because we may carry the gene doesn't mean that we will express the disease. And maybe there are things that we can do with our behavior and diet, which we will talk about in next slides, so that even if we had a partial gene, we can do what's called epigenetics, where we can modify our epidemiology or our external forces so that we don't express that. Aging. Is memory loss a normal part of aging? There's some statistics that have shown up to 1/3 of people over the age of 85 will have some form of memory loss, and questionable 50% over the age of 90. But that doesn't have to be a normal part of aging, and that is kind of our newest frontier. If folks are feeling that they're having some memory loss, it's okay to like forget why you went into a room. We are now perhaps multitasking and multi-distracted with a lot of our technology, wearable technology, whether our phone is going off, our wristwatch is going off because of a phone call or a text, and we drop our train of thought for that short-term memory when we go into one room or another, or we forget our keys. Some element of that is a normal part of aging. It doesn't mean we have a problem or a disease. However, if we ask the same questions over and over again, we get lost in a certain place, or that a person really knows quite well, or if we have trouble following directions or recipes, or we become confused about time, people, or places, and of course later on not able to take care of oneself, eating poorly, not bathing, being a little risky with our behaviors, those are some concerning signs of significant memory issues and should be brought to my attention or any doctor's attention. And some people just attribute some of these things as normal aging. So that's why I wanted to just highlight that that shouldn't be considered normal. There are disorders of memory, and there's a ton. Some of the organic dementias that can occur are Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, where different proteins are growing in different parts of the body. There are toxins that can cause us to have memory loss. Lack of blood flow to the brain and ischemia or strokes can cause damage and memory loss. Vitamins and nutritional deficiencies can cause memory loss, as well as low thyroid. If you've had a pattern of, as we're learning many from our football players, brain injury and repetitive concussions can lead to memory dysfunction. And certain infections can invade the brain and result in memory loss. And so it's important to keep that in mind as well. Let's talk about alcohol because everybody knows we can't drink and drive. We can't function with our motor control very well when we've had alcohol. This study out of the United Kingdom of over 25,000 participants who received MRI scanning is getting a lot of press in my medical literature and the news feeds that I've been receiving. And the reason is that the headline speaks for itself. The end of happy hour. There is no safe level of alcohol for the brain. What this study was interesting and novel in doing is that they took a group of people that they've been prospectively evaluating. They've done cognitive assessments. The average age is around 59, and they've been following these folks, and they assessed their consumption of alcohol and their MRI scans, and then they do memory assessments on them. Most of these folks were moderate or binge alcohol consumers, and some were non-alcohol consumers, and those are the control group. And then very few were heavy users. And what they noticed is that moderate and binge alcohol consumption, and moderate is like 1 to 2 drinks a day, showed a decline in gray matter and definitely correlated with the amount consumed. And this was in the short term. It was just people had consumed alcohol and they were imaging the brain after the consumption of alcohol. And they were able to see, compared to people without having consumed alcohol, the changes in brain activity in the active consumption process. They also noticed that those with high blood pressure and a higher BMI tended to have more activity or decline in their gray matter function. And so what that means long term is going to be interesting, but we do have data that alcohol does have not only short-term effects, but also long-term. So we all know and can feel the short-term effects of alcohol on our brain. And we do know that it changes our brain chemistry. There's some increases of activity of GABA and some major inhibitory neurotransmitters so that we have sluggish responses, slurred speech, our gait becomes unsteady. And we may not be able to really remember very much while we are consuming alcohol. Long term, it does result in shrinking of the brain and memory loss. And that has been long known. So it shouldn't seem like a new information. However, one thing I've learned in this over the years is that since there were some studies about how 1 drink a day or 2 drinks a day can be beneficial or medicinal for heart health, the studies about the brain just fell on the wayside, and this has been just known that alcohol does cause dementia. Here's a scan of a person 8 years apart, showing changes in the brain activity, in the brain function and matter with continued alcohol use. And the white areas that are present here are reflective of the changes due to alcohol. And if you also can tell, some volume loss exists as well. But these areas are alcohol related damage on the brain in a person after 8 years of moderate use. So in summary of the last bit, after seeing the UK study, personally, it has made me really rethink the consumption of alcohol as a benign process. I do think that a nice glass of wine can complement a meal. Do we have to finish the glass? Can we just do a few sips and hydrate in between? Those studies are yet to be performed, but my recommendation is consume alcohol on a limited basis, perhaps socially, but don't feel like you need to do it on a nightly basis, and there is no medicinal benefit. What about sleep? We've heard a lot about sleep and memory. So what happens to our brain during sleep? And it doesn't go to sleep. Our body relaxes, but sleep is very, very important for what we call memory consolidation. I simplistically call it filing away our memories of the day or the week during sleep. During different stages of sleep, we've got plenty of neuro studies showing all the different activity of the brain waves during multiple stages of sleep. We also now are seeing on cross sections, and unfortunately, they've done mice and rat studies that are showing what I've got pictured here in terms of enhancement of with less sleep, you don't have as much immune function in the brain. With more sleep, you see better immunity, better neural integrity, and we see an improved cognitive function in terms of capabilities of recall. So under 6 hours of sleep has been associated with cognitive impairment. And if you can get more than 6 hours of restful sleep, then you may have a better brain preservation and memory preservation. So that leads us to talk about, well, what about sleeping pills? And how can, if we need sleep and we, for some reason, due to biological reasons, emotional reasons, worries, or just habit, can't get enough sleep, there have been plenty of sleeping aids on the market. And how will that affect our mind and memory? Well, with a multitude of different medicines, anticholinergics, those drugs are most commonly are bladder medicines. They kind of fit in the kind of like Benadryl as well. Those are being studied right now because of their activity on our brain, and we know that we can. Some of them make us sleepy. The Z drugs. These are our sleeping pills in the Ambien family that are not in the benzodiazepines, which are the old Valium, Xanax, that family, but they still have the Z in them. And then there's other sleep aids. Right now, CBD oil from marijuana or marijuana itself is commonly used. We also in medicine put people to sleep with anesthesia and sometimes heavy drugs. And these are things that we are looking at in a long-term studies to see if they impact dementia or they cause dementia. There's some preliminary studies showing, just like the alcohol on the brain impact, that shows that there are some changes in brainwave activity and brain matter. So there's a lot of conflicting data that shows that there is no change in baseline dementia, but these studies are really, really hard to evaluate because of habits. What if that person is smoking and they're also using some alcohol, and how do you tease out all of that? But we definitely know with all of these agents, short-term memory is impacted, and that there may be a trend to long-term deficits. Probably the most prominent study that I know of is in anesthesia and cardiopulmonary bypass surgery. And there are now longer term studies showing that people who have had cardiac bypass surgery um, and an ICU stay can have some long term memory impact. So now the shorter the surgery, the better in terms of duration and being under anesthesia. I thought everybody should find this one interesting. COVID may cause long-term brain loss. And this was just released, and this was a pathologic study in brain imaging before and after COVID-19. And they've also got some other animal studies, but not very many. But this one was looking at about 394 patients with 388 matched controls, all who had COVID, but not the 388 controls. And they were doing scan studies, and they also noted changes in gray matter on average at 37 months later. And so they do see some long-term loss of brain tissue from COVID. What does that mean in terms of dementia? They looked at these folks who had also all lost their sense of smell and taste, because we know that the olfactory bulb is up higher in the brain. What does that mean long term? It's unknown right now. But this is something why we don't want to get COVID. So what about the diet and what can we do? So studies have shown of all the diets, and this was a 2019 study of 3 different diets, the DASH diet and then the ADPQ diet and the Mediterranean diet. And they found that the Mediterranean diet seemed to be associated or correlated with less cognitive decline than perhaps the DASH diet or the low salt diet. What about coffee in our diet? We're seeing a lot of information about coffee and on the mind, and I've got a few slides after this that I'll discuss further. Fatty fish is part of the Mediterranean diet, and perhaps that it's high in omega-3 fatty acids, which with our brain being 60% fat, may help keep that tissue nice and vital. And so fish oil and fatty fish has been correlated with slowing the memory impairment of aging. Dietary studies are very, very difficult to perform because sleep, again, alcohol, and all the other things I've mentioned to you before can confound some of these nutrients. Blueberries are high in polyphenols, which are antioxidants, and they're thought to be a good brain food. Just recently, turmeric got added to the list, perhaps because of its anti-inflammatory properties, but there's very little studies on memory loss. Broccoli is high in vitamin K, which is a precursor to what's called sphingolipids, which are our neural lipids. Pumpkin seeds are high in magnesium, zinc, copper, and iron, and that helps the connectivity of our nerve cells. Dark chocolates are high in flavonoids and thought to be a good brain food. And nuts, fats, they contain fats, antioxidants, and vitamin E, which is supposed to be an antioxidant in the brain. And studies have shown that women who eat a diet with high in nuts tend to have less cognitive impairment than those who did not. But these are all kind of a retrospective dietary log studies. So if you take care of your body and eat healthy, you can lower your risk of cognitive decline. Coffee, caffeine, and health. There was a great review article out of the New England Journal published last year showing a multitude of benefits with coffee consumption. And one question when we say, oh, coffee's good for us, well, how much? And they said up to 3 to 4 cups a day, about 400 milligrams of caffeine is okay. Um, if we look at all the different forms of caffeine, I found it interesting that brewed coffee from a coffee shop has 235 milligrams of caffeine. Now, the only place that I know that can make coffee like that is Starbucks, and I bet that's where they're kind of thinking about that. And a cafe Americano, 150 milligrams. But if you're home brewing your coffee, you're only getting about 92 milligrams of caffeine, which would be in the 3 to 4 cup range at home. And then everything else is much less, except for an energy shot. Now, I don't recommend soft drinks or some of these agents to get our source of caffeine. I would rather have you consume brewed coffee and black because of the added benefit of polyphenols in the coffee itself. Now, what does coffee do for us? It's felt that it increases our mental performance and vigilance because maybe we're a little bit more alert. But the downside is it may contribute to a little bit of insomnia and anxiety in certain people. Coffee may reduce the risk of depression, but also the downside is that it can upset our stomach, especially if we're taking uh, non-steroidals. Interestingly, it may reduce the risk of Parkinson's disease, and there have been some association studies that showed that regular coffee drinkers tended to have a lower incidence of Parkinson's. More to follow on that. We do know cardiovascularly that it does increase blood pressure in the short term, but you develop a partial tolerance as you get used to drinking it. Caffeine is used to treat apnea for preemie babies, and it may improve lung function. And then it does increase skeletal muscle insulin sensitivity in the short term, so it helps you kind of burn sugar. But for our brain, which is the topic of conversation today, the mental performance and vigilance is an interesting way of thinking about cognitive capacity. So in terms of improving our memory function, I get a lot of questions about supplements. Should I take a supplement? Well, no supplement has been proven to slow down our cognitive decline. It makes us feel like we're doing something. One thing I wanted to talk about and bring to your attention is something called adalimumab, which is the new Biogen drug that's hitting the airwaves that the FDA just approved, which when I saw that headline, I was thinking, what? Because in December, there was this, the study was prematurely discontinued for lack of benefit. So when we saw it come through as an FDA approved drug, I was surprised, and I'm glad that the FDA advisory panel was surprised because many of those very highly regarded physicians resigned from their FDA volunteer work when their advice was not heeded that it should not be approved. This is a monoclonal antibody, which is against the beta amyloid plaque in Alzheimer's. And what they found in the earlier studies is that there really wasn't any change in plaque or any improvement in memory by use of this drug. But the side effects could be significant, including bleeding in the brain. So the risk benefit of this drug was of question. However, in Alzheimer's, there's really nothing that is reversing this trajectory. And there's a group of people who would like any hope possible. And maybe the FDA was pressured by that. It's hard to know, but this one is now the Cleveland Clinic and many large hospital systems are refusing to administer this drug. So I think some of the conversations I've had with folks, they're like, and I don't want to be the first one out the gate on this drug. What about crossword puzzles? There were articles many years ago saying everybody should be doing crossword puzzles to keep our brain active. Well, to be honest with you, crossword puzzles are a repetitive memory retrieval process. You already know what's in these answers, and you take it from the uh, books in your filing cabinets or on your shelves of your mind, and you retrieve them. So it really is a retrieval process, but it doesn't cross train your brain and help build new memory or function, which we call neuroplasticity. So it's better to try to learn something new and work your brain and work other parts. So if you had a mini stroke or a TIA and you get to be a little bit more forgetful, well, if you try to learn something new, you actually get other parts of your brain helping you with your memory. And that's very important. Exercise. There have been studies recently out of Europe that shows women who continue to exercise through their 50s and 60s can decrease the onset of that age-related memory decline, sometimes up to by 11 years. So by improving the blood flow to the brain, there's a thought that that exercise is a good thing. I think exercise is a good thing for a multitude of reasons for our bodies. Is there a perfect memory food? No, but it's better to have, like I showed you, the Mediterranean diet, which has a balance of all of the things that are known to be antioxidants and healthy for the mind. Another important thing is to continue to refresh our memory. I think the main thing that I've learned out of COVID and the COVID isolation, is that our engagement with old friends, old family, new friends is really important for memory building. And so when a friend that you grew up with says, oh, remember so and so, or then suddenly you visually go back there and it just comes to the forefront. But if no one's prompting you, then we kind of get into a pattern of our own memory and working memory, and we may lose some important information over time, which I think is a great segue for me to introduce somebody on this call today, Professor Gordon Bell, who is going to come out with a book called Total Recall, and he's done some phenomenal work on providing contextual cues and maybe revolutionizing the way we think about memory and storage and another way to help us. So with that, I'd like to invite Professor Bell to share some thoughts.
Great. Just thank you, Dr. Devereaux. Actually, the work on this book, the book came out in 2008, and it was Total Recall, and it represented almost a decade of work of a research project that I and my colleague Jim Gemmell did regarding with the first topic of exploring what does it mean to store everything in your life. So it was really an experiment to see first if we could, how much of quote everything could we store about our lives, and then and that was a kind of a technology question. Was there a good place to store it? Because we saw memories, computer memories getting larger. And so we were challenged by what do you do with all that memory? And then after we asked that question, it was okay, can we, how much, what kinds of things would we store, and we explored everything we could think of about that. And then the question was, is this of any utility to anybody? And how do you make this thing, this mechanical brain, useful? And at the time, and I'm still at Microsoft Research, and so it was a research question of really part, and we defined a word, life logging, and that if you go out and look at life logging, you'll see that we'll pop up as kind of pioneers of basically logging everything in your life, which is was the whole focus of the project. And so in a sense, in writing this book called Total Recall, it's a synopsis of, or it's a bunch of different chapters on why would you want to store everything in your life. For example, there's a section on for just health information. So having all of the information about one's health, and having something that could be useful in maybe sometime later on of being able to recall that. And all of us who I'm here have one or two or three chronic conditions. Those turn out to be useful when you're in terms of being able to recall that. But we started our first few years was really prompted by a friend of mine who said, "Can I have your books and store them as part of a project? Because we want to store every book of the 20th century." That was in 1998. He asked me that question, and that prompted me to say, well, gee, I should store everything get rid of all this paper that I have. So it led me down a paperless trail for a while, which I said, let's get rid of everything that I have that's in paper. And then I sort of ultimately, and that kind of, that got rid of photographs, for example, and basically making everything that you think of as analog became digital. So it was photographed, all of our music, all the sensory stuff that one would use for recall, or those sensory memories that we have, like photos and CDs, and which you may or may not remember, or records, and that we stored all of that. Oh, and home movies, getting rid of all of this stuff. And immediately I was storing all of my correspondences that I had, files. I was head of engineering for a computer company for a number of years, and I just recently turned over what I call 20 or about 18 banker boxes of letters and the correspondence of that period, and that corresponded to about 20,000 pages of text. And then, and as I was going along with, the first thing was computer people do is to store have all of your email. And then after we wrote this first paper which came out in 2001, where we had said, really made a good estimate of how much storage is required to store, home movies and videos and correspondence and whatever. And we were accosted by various people saying, oh, you must, you're crazy. Yeah, people need to delete, people need to be able to forget. And so our mantra was no, don't delete anything. So on your, when you have email and you, as you all get all this email in, aside from all of the spam that you get, basically I've stored every email I've had since for about the last 25 years. And at various times that will turn out to be something 25 years ago will be useful. And then may be occasionally painful. But anyway, that's kind of the corpus of what we were doing and what the experiment was all about. And it's something that I guess the bottom line was, I say that my true memory is my e-memory. That is something I really can depend on, knowing what day it was, what some of the quantitative factors were of an event. And then my biomemory is really metadata or something that may help me recall the true memory when I'm looking for something. And so all of this is kind of the, what the work was. And so I guess to you, let me make an appeal that a computer is a very useful device. And along the way, we ended up with a thing called a SenseCam, which was a camera. This isn't a SenseCam, but it was about this size, and it was worn around this and around my neck, and we would take a picture every 20 seconds. And then when people looked at that, and this was in 2003, they said, oh, that would be dangerous, having that, and illegal and all that. And that was the forerunner for today's modern police body cam. And we can all argue how great or useful the body cam is, or what the effect of body cams. But anyway, that's kind of the overall thing of what Total Recall is all about, and how useful I think it is, and convincing you that don't ever delete anything on your computer, and put in as much stuff as you can, because the computers are good enough to sort of, when you drop or make a file there, whether it's 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 photographs, computers today are so good at going and telling you, oh, I want to look at my great aunt, photos for my great aunt, and the computer will in fact find those photos and identify them and classify them. So computers are amazingly, to me, I've spent my life building them and being with them, and so I'm a strong advocate of the computer. It is a child. I'm watching this child grow. I've watched the child grow and get smarter and more useful during, since 1960. So I've done it. I'm into it about 60 years now of development. But anyway, that's what I'm doing, and maybe you have some questions about this.
Thank you, Professor Bell, and it is certainly an honor to have you with us today. You are a pioneer on computers, and as you were speaking, one thing that I find challenging, even trying to retrieve my memories on my own computer, is how I store my files, which is basically what mentally we are doing in our sleep and how we organize them. And do you foresee a better retrieval process with the computers that will help keep us engaged?
Uh, well, unfortunately, that was one of the areas that the first area that we kind of started out to work on, which was something, and you mentioned it before, autobiographical memory. And if you ask, because when you go down this path, by the way, what you end up being is you are a librarian for your own life. And it turns out that if you go to library scientists, they have never thought about how do you have a library for a life. They have a library for books, but not one for lives. And the concept of the autobiographical memory is kind of the basic filing structure that you have. And that filing and autobiographical, I had, as I started the project, I thought of a concept called lives, and lives are essentially the top nodes of a thing called of the autobiographical memory. And so within an autobiographical memory of a kind, you may have birthday parties, and then within those birthday parties, specific birthday parties. And so you have these kind of events of these lives that you have, because all of us have all of these different lives. These are a number of people that you're associated with and having them in context. It can be a sports, it's your family. Your first main life is that with your parents, and those form individually, those forms lives of their own, and they have their own context. So that's a framework that you can have, but the computer doesn't help you very much. It doesn't to do that. That's a regret that we had within when I worked within Microsoft. Of trying to get a much better filing system or things that could help be useful. For example, one of our things that our system would do was when you see a photograph come up, you could make either verbal or physical or comments about the photograph, and that would be associated with the photo, and you could pull it up again. So that if somebody was looking at your photos, as we've all got this collection of photos, but they're just photos there, but it's nicer if you have the person who was part of that to make a comment, and as you go through and you see those again, you want that ability to comment. But right now, I think you're stuck with essentially just in the photo area. You're in good shape because you can't. The computer really is able to differentiate and find all of the pictures, the faces of being unique. And of course, that's the good side of it. The bad side is all the social things that Big Brother, of being able to find specific people in a crowd. But as far as email is concerned, or letters that you have, scans of things, then you're stuck by trying to find things just by plain ordinary searching, looking for a name, looking for something. And then I'll say the secret to that, as far as I'm concerned, is anytime you have a file, you have some information, or perhaps a letter or something like that, as you give it, as you identify that, just really go out of your way to describe that in the file name itself. And so that when you say, I want a file of a particular person, then the computer's got to got something that it can pick up, a handle. You're looking, so as you record stuff, you want to put handles, all these handles around so that they can be retrieved again.
Well, thank you very, very much. And it is, everybody should Google Gordon Bell, and you'll be very, very impressed. And I thank you for that. And I maybe we'll have you back and just give us another computer how to organize all of this, because
Yeah.
I think that's where I am stuck. But thank you again for all of that, and good luck on your book. I will definitely be getting a
Okay.
copy. And our last slide is a COVID-19 update. And I have to admit, I'm getting worried again. It is, as you know, there are variants, and we've had the conversation on how variants form. There is a Lambda variant, which is now, it's the P1 from South America, that a few weeks ago was high in prevalence in Washington State and was filling up their hospitals. Right now, what we are dealing with is a 60% predominant Delta variant. And I put the S there only because we have the Delta variant is a double mutation variant, and that's the one that just tore through India. And we saw what happened there. We said, oh, it's because they had this big crowds and they're not vaccinated. However, because of my own family members that were affected there and some of the villages and some of the stories I was hearing, I was like, no, something's different there, because it is knocking down younger people quickly and there's just no time for rescue. And that is exactly what's happening here too. This Delta variant is a B1617-2 and a -1 mutation. And then there's something called the Delta Plus that has 2 added mutations, one of which is the South African variant, and another one is a new mutation, the K417N. And now we are seeing rising rates in California. And just this morning, everything you're getting is just hot off the press. I was talking to physician colleagues in Northern California, doctor and ID physician intensivist and his wife, both double vaccinated, currently are experiencing COVID, temperatures to 103, and their 2 children have COVID as well. And so it is coming through. And I think what happens, and they're careful. And he was emailing me, he says, I've been, he's protected. There's no shortage of masks and behaviors. So this is highly transmissible, and that's what they mean. That means that it doesn't take much. There are reports from Australia that just opening hotel doors can cause some transmission. We do know with SARS and Hong Kong, the original SARS, that the ventilation systems are sources of transmission. So I think we need to watch out here. And I think that we're going to need to still be careful. There is hope. We do have monoclonal antibodies that will partially treat the Delta variant in California because of our original California variant, and then this predominance of the Delta variant. We aren't even permitted to receive some of the older monoclonal antibodies. The FDA said California cannot get these drugs because they are ineffective. And that we've known for the last about 6 to 8 weeks. So right now our product is casirivimab plus imdevimab, which is the Regeneron product. Good news is that they have it in a subcutaneous form, which was just released a few weeks ago, and IV infusion. Because of some cases from last week, we've dusted off our shelves at Sharp and getting ready for using this drug. Yesterday, and I think it might hit the news wave, in San Diego, there was an outbreak at a nursing home, over 34 people infected. So these are things that are getting my attention. It won't cause a hospital surge because we have these treatments and we want to get them on board early. What about our future with treatments? There are two drugs of hope, molnupiravir and favipiravir. I'm sorry, it's a mouthful. The first one is expected to be released and approved by December, and it's basically like a Tamiflu. So the sooner we get it on board from a first positive test, it will decrease viral replication. These are antiviral medicines, not monoclonals. And the second one is being currently studied in Japan, and it is a drug that's active in Japan against other viruses, and they're testing it for COVID. Now, vaccine updates. I know first and foremost on everyone's mind is boosters, and when will it be out, and do I need one? Well, I think with what's happening here, we may be thinking about a booster. Pfizer has said that they've got boosters in the works, maybe by January of next year. Remember, healthcare workers in the US were the first to receive vaccine, so we will probably be the first ones to be experimented on for a booster, but I think we would step up willingly, as you know, for this protection, especially given what I just told you about my colleagues in Northern California who are frontline and affected. What about mixing? If you received a dose of the J&J, or, you know, I get this a lot because folks have gotten the AstraZeneca and are traveling here. It is okay to mix if absolutely necessary. We do think that the duration of protection is at least 1 year. I have been testing, let's skip to the third dose one for immune compromised, anybody who's had a transplant. There have been studies in the last few weeks that showed that a person who's received like a heart transplant, lung transplant, kidney transplant, they're on immune suppressives, received their first dose, second dose of the mRNA vaccine, and they tested their spike protein antibody, which I'm happy to do if anybody's concerned. And they had like 0 antibodies. So some of these people in the study were doctors themselves. So they said, I'm taking a third shot. And that got their immune response boosted. And so that was published in the New England Journal just a few weeks ago. Another thing that's on everybody's mind is the myocarditis risks. With the messenger RNA vaccines, there's about 12.6 cases per million, and 323 cases within 3 weeks of getting the vaccine was what was reported. And that is the Pfizer Moderna vaccine. And they're saying that this is kind of, the tendency is more in younger males. And so that's what's got some of our younger folks a little bit more vaccine hesitant. 80% of them maybe just are hospitalized, but they're out of the hospital within days, and very few have died from this, but this is still in the active process of being studied. Just in the last few days, J&J's vaccine got an FDA warning for Guillain-Barré. Now, Guillain-Barré is a neurologic antibody reaction where we got our vaccine, and then we're building this antibody, and then somehow there's this cross reactivity and this antibody reaction against our nerves, and we start feeling some tingling, numbness in our legs, and then it's a progressive kind of neuropathy that can result in some temporary or permanent paralysis. And so we do know that this is a side effect of many antiviral vaccines, including the flu shot. And we do see cases of Guillain-Barré with the influenza virus vaccine every year. But because of the heightened sensitivity to COVID vaccines, the emergency use authorization, et cetera, this is now getting more attention. So the bottom line of this update is that I recommend that we just go back to pre-June 15th, mask when you're going out shopping, mask at restaurants, or avoid going inside at restaurants. Think about crowds, think about parties, and maybe consider only doing things out in outdoor settings, especially with our incidents rising. It's not as rampant as it was in January, February, March. So our case numbers are still not very high, but it is doubling. And so I just want to bring that to your attention. We did have one very intelligent question that came up by one of our listeners, that the memory loss from COVID, why is it 37 months when COVID hasn't been around that long? And I think that was because of the anticipated gray matter repair that they know in terms of the regeneration of those cells. We do know that there is some time that we can repair our cells. And so that's why they're saying it can last that long, but more to follow on that. Thank you for that question. With that, does anybody else have any questions? I'll stop recording and open the mic.